Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I finally have my January 2025 wrap-up. So I know this is really late in the month of February, but I mean, within the first couple of weeks, hopefully, but I've been off and on sick and having a lot of stuff going on with work and school recently, so I haven't really had the time or the energy to film this, but I finally found some of both to be able to do this. So we're gonna try to get through this as quick as possible because a lot of the stuff that I have talked about, a lot of these books have been in my vlogs in the course of January, so I'm not gonna really go too far into them, but I will basically give you the idea of what my star rating was in terms of it being on call pile and everything else. So first, let's go over the stats for the month. So I did complete 8 books over the course of the month. I did have 2 DNFs, so I got basically a total of 10 books done over the course of the month. I read a total of 2,872 pages and 0 minutes worth of audiobooks. In the month of the books that I completed, I had 5 5-star reads and 3 4-star reads. And out of the books that I did complete, 7 of them were personal from my own library and 1 was borrowed from my local library. Then going into the month's other stats, I had 4 of the books were fantasy and 4 were contemporary of the ones that I did complete. I had no sci-fi, no historical, and no nonfiction books. The average page count I had for the month was about 92.65 pages per day. No average minutes per day, considering I didn't really listen to any audiobooks in the month. And my average rating was a 7.09, or basically a low 4-star for the month. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the actual books I read. So the first one I completed was Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This was a carryover from December, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book very much. This focuses on a set of women that one is basically a photographer. She is photographing her stepsister's wedding and basically finds out that the groom is not really that great of a guy, and she kind of hooks up with and starts scheming how to break up the wedding a little bit with one of the bridesmaids, which is one of the stepsister's best friends. And the two of them kind of get together and they start kind of forming this relationship, along with scheming to figure out how they can break up this couple, which doesn't necessarily like the thing I would recommend per se, but at the same time it was all done with good intentions and there was a real purpose, because the guy was a douchebag. Like, he was absolutely awful, but I loved this so much. I loved the story of these two and individually. One of our characters is a single mom and is dealing with kind of the problems in some ways of being a bisexual person, where you are, you know, attracted to both genders. And so it's very interesting to see that dynamic play in when she's then falling for a person of the same gender as her. So it's very, very interesting to see that kind of dynamic and that kind of dilemma being brought up within that, and kind of dealing with the consequences of some of the actions that she takes within a lot of this. Then I had my first DNF of the year, which was Touch of Power by Maria V. Snyder. This is the first book in the something series. I don't know what it's called. Let me look up what it was on Call Pile. The Healer series by Maria V. Snyder. I DNF'd this about 120 pages in. I found that really the thing with this one, I liked it initially, but the further on I went, I kind of lost the point of why I was enjoying, of like what about these characters I was supposed to enjoy, and I just didn't feel connected to it, and so I felt like it just was very flat for me, and I didn't really see much of a point continuing with it if I didn't really get enticed by the characters all that much after 120 pages. Then I did finally complete Andrea Stewart's The Gods Below. This was also a carryover from December. Gave this a 4-star. And I should be clear in terms of like looking at the call pile stats. Delilah Green Doesn't Care was a 9.14, which equated to a 5-star. This equated to a 7.71, or pretty much a 4-star, almost a 4.5 star. I liked this, I think, a lot more than I did the Bone Shard Daughter series by Andrea. I was really happy with how this story ended up going. There were some jumps in logic, I think, that I was not necessarily as big of a fan of. There were some things about the world I was still really confused on, but for the most part, I really enjoyed this. I think I enjoyed this, like I said, a lot more than the Bone Shard Daughter. I feel like that this is a much more promising series for me in particular in terms of their writing, and I do like the way that this was left off for at least a sequel, so I am very excited to see more from this series and more from this world, because some of the things that happened in this, I was like, oh boy, how are we going to remedy this? The next book I completed was Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. Again, another carryover from December. This one got a 9.57 or a 5-star. This was one of my highest rated books of the month. I love this. This is the prequel to The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas, where this follows Star's father when he is a young adult and he finds out that a person he had kind of been with is pregnant with his child, and he currently has a girlfriend that he was on a break with when he got this other girl pregnant. And so it's kind of like him being a single father for some time and having to deal with that, while also dealing with some of his own personal things, with possibly being in part of a drug running gang and things of that nature, and trying to basically survive as a single father, and a black single father at that, in an area that is not well known for black young men surviving very well in terms of society and in terms of things like drug gangs and things like that. So this really paints a really interesting picture, I think, of Star's father in particular, who you grow to really admire and love in The Hate U Give. And there always was, for me, that kind of wanting of a backstory for him in terms of his connections with some of the people that were in The Hate U Give. And in terms of going into like Star's older brother, Seven, how exactly his whole upbringing was when Star's father was a younger man, how that whole thing went down. So it was really cool to see that whole story get fleshed out, and I just fell absolutely in love with this and with Maverick and everything to do with this book. I think that this is honestly one of my favorite books, I will say, so far this year. The next book I read was another carryover from December, which was Long Live Evil by Rees. This ended up getting an 8.43, or around basically a 4.5 star. I was so not sure how this was going to pan out for me. I knew this was a story that was going to deal with a villain, a villainess in particular, and this was very much centered in a story where the character ends up becoming a character in their favorite book series and having to be the villainess of that book series and having to deal with the ramifications of that and how they're going to navigate the world because of it and maybe make some things kind of turn on their head. I was not sure how I was going to like this, but I found this to be so much more enjoyable than I initially thought. I thought it was so very witty and funny. There were some really great moments, I think, in terms of the main character and how they dealt with different things that came across their way. And the ending, oh my god, the ending of this book was just phenomenal. Like, it was one of those things where I had to read it probably 3 times before it finally sunk in what actually happened at the very end. And when it did, I was floored. There were some things in this that I definitely felt like were a little odd and goofy, and there were some things that I kind of was like, yeah, I don't know so much about that. But overall, I had such a great time with this. I would love to read another book in this series if there's going to be one. I hope there's going to at least be one more. But I really like this, and I would like to see more of what Rees has come out with, because I believe this is their first adult fantasy? I could be wrong, but I think that they've at least come out with some other books in the past. But this was very, very fun. Highly recommend if you're looking for a villainess kind of story. The next book I completed was another carryover from December, and that was The Stars Are Dying by Chloe C. Penaranda. This one ended up getting a 7.29 or a 4-star overall. I found that my biggest gripe with this was the first 100 pages felt very slow to me, and a lot of that was because of the world building that was being done within the story. So go into it with that mindset. But once I got past that 100-page hump, I flew through this book. Like, the world was so cool, but also was very confusing at times. I feel like that was one of my bigger gripes with this, was that I felt the world was a little confusing in terms of the structure of things with the different races that were involved in this world. There's a whole trials aspect that is involved in this that I thought was also a little confusing at times. But overall, my enjoyment of this was much greater than the gripes I had with it. I found it to be very fun. There's a lot of pining in this. There's a lot of reveals toward the end that were a little predictable at some times, but was still very enjoyable. I definitely think this is something that needs to be looked at, and I'm very excited for the second book, which is going to hopefully be something I read in February, because the second book of the series just came out January 28th. And I really like this enough to where I would be considering reading the rest of the series and more from Chloe, because I know Chloe has written other books in the past as well. But also this edition is just stunning. I love the art that's in this and the sprayed edges and everything. This is just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. And I was really surprised, again, with how much I enjoyed this, considering that first 100-page hump was really kind of bogging me down for quite some time. But I ended up persevering and was pretty well rewarded, I think, in the end overall. Next, I read my next 5-star read, which was With a Little Luck by Marissa Meyer. This came out to a 9.71 and was my one of the 2 highest rated books I had in the month of January. This is the second book in the Fortuna Beach series, which the first book is Instant Karma. And this follows the twin brother of the main character that we see in Instant Karma. This follows Jude, who is a D&D player. He's kind of a nerd. He's kind of, you know, like your typical nerdy kind of guy. And he has this D20 that he finds at his family's record store that somehow starts giving him a ton of luck. One thing of which being that the girl he's had a crush on since he was a child is now suddenly interested in him. And so that leads to a whole new line of possibilities for him. And he starts getting involved with a lot of new things and meeting new people. And there's a lot of things coming up for him and his best friend Ari that are super, super important for them in terms of their future careers. And it's kind of him just really navigating life with this new ability of unattainable luck. And this series has my heart and soul. Marissa Meyer is an author that can do no wrong in my eyes when it comes to writing, because I've loved the Lunar Chronicles, I loved the Renegade series, and I've loved the Fortuna Beach books. They are so warm and cozy and fun and just so, so, so cool. I think the only gripe I had with this really was I think that there was just too much of Jude being like stubborn at times, and it just really kind of like aggravated me sometimes when he was being super stubborn. But it was understandable because he's a, you know, older teenager verging on young adult, and so they're very stubborn as it is. I would know. I used to be one of them. But this was so much fun to read. I love this series, and I hope we get at least one more book in this series, maybe following one of the other siblings in Jude and Prue's family, because I think that it would be so much fun to see one of the siblings get a little older and see something that they do and what exactly they get into and what their special ability ends up becoming. The next book I ended up reading was The Wilful Princess and the Piebald Prince by Robin Hobb. This is the novella that basically starts off the entire world of the realm of the Elderlings, which I will be hosting a live show for this. By the time this video goes out, it might be the next day. I'm hoping to get this out by Friday the 7th. So if it is out that time, it's going to be Saturday, February 8th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This I ended up giving also a 5-star. I ended up coming to a 9.29, and this was really cool. This, I think, honestly really set up the politics of the world very well, and overall what we can kind of expect in terms of the way that the world is set up politically going into the Farseer series. This also delves into what is called the Fate, which essentially is a type of magic-wielding person who is able to essentially communicate with animals, which is a huge part of the Farseer trilogy at the very least. So I think that this was a really great way to get us into the world, a nice little novella that helped us with understanding the world and some of the characters and some of the people that will very likely be coming into the forefront later on in the series. But this has 2 short stories, where the first is called The Wilful Princess, which essentially talks about this woman who is retelling the story of her infatuation and relationship and sisterhoodness with this princess that she literally grows up with from birth. And then it goes on to later on the princess's son, who we call the Piebald prince, and his rise and fall basically in the kingdom, and everything leading up to basically what we will see going on in the realm of the Elderlings with the Farseer trilogy. So I don't want to go too much into it because I do want to reserve a lot of my thoughts and feelings on it and stuff going into the live show, but really like this. I think this was a stellar way to get started with the series, and I'm very happy that I decided to start off this series with this one, because I think that this would give us a lot of context into how the world is and how people view those that have the fate, things like that. The next book is my second highest rated book of the month, and is probably my most favorite of the month. It was actually listed as my #1 favorite of the entire month, and that is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a literary fiction novel that has sci-fi elements, where we are following an aspiring writer who writes their very first sci-fi novel after having sworn off of sci-fi, never having written or read sci-fi before, and it becomes a massive hit. And there's a lot of things about it too that are really important, with the fact that the character is both disabled and is Nigerian American. There are a lot of things that kind of delve into the combination of those things, how those things separately affect them, and how all of that ties into their fame and fortune that comes from creating this stellar work of art that everybody seems to love. And this is my first Nnedi Okorafor book. I, from the get-go, was in love with this writing. I ended up giving this a 9.71 out of 10, which was a 5-star. Again, same score as With a Little Luck, but I definitely think this was the winner between the two. I loved everything about this, except for like a couple little things, more so with the siblings. I got really annoyed with the siblings for a lot of reasons, but I think it was kind of meant to be that way, if that makes sense. So I just fell in love with this, from the way that it was created, the way that the story of rusted robots in the book was created, the little pieces of interviews that we get from the family members of the author, the pieces we get of rusted robots within this. Just everything hit exactly where I was wanting it to with this kind of a book. And there were parts of this book that I didn't even know I wanted that I absolutely loved and adored. And so I highly recommend reading this. It just came out on January 14th, and I got my hands on it as soon as I could. This was absolutely amazing. I am so very happy that Brandy decided to pick this for their Patreon book club, because it was such a great choice, and I cannot wait for the live show for this, because I am so excited to be able to gush and spew my guts out about this book, because I will be shouting about this from the rooftops forever. Like, this is amazing, and I cannot wait to read more of Nnedi's actual sci-fi work, because if Rusted Robots gave me any indication of what Nnedi has to offer when it comes to sci-fi, I think I'm gonna like her actual sci-fi books a lot. Final book that I actually ended up DNFing in the month of January was A Royal Farce by Laura Heffernen. This is a romantic comedy, friends to kind of marriage of convenience kinds of things. This is dealing with a girl who, her best friend, who is from this island off the coast of France, is very wealthy, is very like kind of almost prince-like, ends up deciding that he wants to marry her so that he can get his green card and avoid having to go back to where he comes from, because his mother is being very, very upper-handed way of trying to bring him back, and he does not want that. So he thinks that the way to escape is to marry his best friend, who already knows him pretty well, and basically go from there. Like, I thought of it as like the proposal, except the two main characters are actually friends starting off with, as opposed to like being kind of ambivalent acquaintances. But this was okay. Like, I just feel like I didn't really connect with the main character all that much. I felt that she was, I don't know, a little whiny, and so I just felt like it wasn't really that enticing to me after a while, and I didn't really want to continue with it. So I ended up DNFing it after about 90 pages in, which was a good enough, I think, understanding of the story for me to be like, yeah, I kind of know where this is going. I don't really feel like I need to read this anymore. I'm done with it, kind of thing. But there we go. That is everything that I read in the month of January. I'm going to try not to spill all these, but hopefully you guys read some good things as well in the month of January. Let me know what you guys ended up reading, what you enjoyed. Have you read any of these books? What were your thoughts on them? But if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. I also have a Patreon if you would like to access all kinds of other videos that don't make it to YouTube and other things, including reviews of some books that will have more blog style reviews. Hint, hint, Death of the Author will have more and more thoughts on my Patreon. But otherwise, I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.